All right, so the first thing I'm going to do, most of you who watch this know that I typically start with a fill layer, and this is nice because I can just block something in super fast. You start your sketch, and then if you want to kind of change the ambient light color, you just play with it there. It's a real quick way to do it. So I've got a couple scenes here. One where there's like this, it's kind of like this cave, and there's like this kind of light coming through here, but then there's these like objects inside of it, and it's kind of neat. So let's see if we can. Actually, I might just put this dark layer behind the other one so that we can just paint that right in. And there's like some growth, some trees here, and then some broken down structures in here. Kind of interesting reference here. So we're going to use these straight lines, of course, to represent, the human-built structures, and use more of these organic shapes to obviously show how things have been broken down. I'm holding back the temptation to talk about human structures as straight lines and that whole deal. It's kind of a design 101 type thing, so I'll spare you that. So tonight I think we're going to go a little bit looser on the reference, so we're not just kind of doing one-to-one paintings of these scenes. It's not necessarily the intent as I'm doing this. I want to be able to kind of explore these different ideas, and you have a project down the road, kind of a passion project. That's a not quite post-apocalyptic, but kind of in that vein. There's going to be a lot of things broken up and a lot of ruins, that sort of thing. So it'll be fun to play with. And so as I'm looking at this reference, I'm kind of thinking about how it might play into that project someday. Though it's really not on the radar for any time soon. Just kind of noodling over the ideas. Okay, so there's that one. I'll group those. Do a new one over here. Okay. This one's a shipwreck, and so always a fun theme. Unless you're in it, and then it's probably the most horrible thing ever. Weird how that is. These things that capture our imagination are often terrible things to experience, but we won't talk about that tonight. Okay, so I'm just blocking in this this kind of surroundings around the shipwreck, in the sky in there. And then just keep it really rough. I'm okay with that. And then I'm tempted to block in the the main forms with the lasso tool. But instead of doing that, I'm actually going to come about this the opposite way and block in with my brush tool, because it's actually just a lot faster to use a large brush than it is to, try to get all these shapes perfect. And then once I'm happy with this as a block in, then I can come back with the lasso tool and clean it up. That'll hopefully speed things up a little bit. And really just the idea here is that we're using the largest brush available to us. This helps keep the composition in mind rather than getting too bogged down with the details. Even that there, see how it took like 4 or 5 strokes there? Even though those were pretty quick strokes, you could do that with one, big brush. And so I've got this this shipwreck here, and I'm trying to show kind of there's some internal structure going on there, and I think that'll really come to life once we do some cut throughs on this. It's got these radar and smokestacks and these little instruments top here. And a little darker there. So then I grab my color. Well, so a couple things here. I've got these kind of positive and negative shapes going on. So I'm going to start by cutting out some of these areas so that you can see that the ship, there's like this internal cavity there, and if you do a couple of pass-throughs and then you layer, you layer this over top of it, then it'll start to push and pull this depth. And so that's what we're going for here. Oops. All right. I'm just checking on the chat here. Yeah, welcome back. Thanks for faithfully coming back to this. I would say if you're watching, I would really love to have a community of an active painting. Like if you're watching just for enjoyment, that's that's fine. If that's the case, I'm sorry you don't have a more peppy narrator. But if you're an artist and you're looking to improve, push yourself, or really just enjoy the time, I mean, honestly, that's what I'm here for. Then, yeah, I think it'd be cool if if you had your own sketchbook out, or Photoshop going, or whatever, to work on your own painting explorations while we're doing this. I find, it's funny. I'm not saying this to say that it's not okay to watch. It is fine, obviously. But I tend to watch a lot of YouTube videos and try to learn a lot. And while I'm doing that, I know that I learn best through just by doing it, as like a kinesthetic learner. And so I've tried to make that more of a habit, not just to watch something, but to also try to internalize it by doing it. that being said, um, sorry if you can hear me crunching on this candy. My wife gave me these Werthers, and they're delicious. So I'm enjoying those right now. um, but yeah, that being said, you know, on on the YouTube channel, one of the ideas that I had, the things that I would I think enjoy doing with this, is to structure them in a way, where there is something, not necessarily like a follow along, like do this thing, because you don't need that. There's plenty of that stuff out there. But I think that in a different context, not necessarily these live streams, but maybe short videos, just to explain some concepts, and you can get the point across in a very short amount of time. You don't have to spend a lot of time, giving all these different examples or drilling it in. I mean, some things you can really get to the heart of things pretty quickly. But like I said, as a kinesthetic learner, you don't always, it's difficult to internalize something and really, make it your own practice, without kind of getting your hands dirty and getting the feel for it. And so I'd love a format where the concept is explained pretty quickly, and then we dive into exercises that you can do. We just do some example exercises and format it so that it's easy to follow along with. All right, so now, earlier I was talking about getting these positive and negative shapes in. So, I've got this like window cut out here. So if I grab this here and I start building these up, you can see how quickly we can build out that form there. And I'm just gonna put some wear and tear on this edge here. That. All right. And then here, at this point, I might just do a new layer, pin it here so that I can just keep working with this, silhouette that I've got. Sorry, getting distracted. And I'm trying to get the kind of weathered effect going on. And that would be kind of these streaks that come down. And they're not necessarily uniform, but they relate to each other, right? So what's happening here, it comes up. If you followed the form, comes over, up, So like if this is coming down, you need to be able to show that, making this skip. It's coming down here and then jumps over down there. It's down here, jump down there. So you relate those things. Your eye relates those and helps sell the form. All right. And I might be again getting too tight again. I don't want to do that. You want to, or at least in my opinion, you want to keep pressing ahead with bold, confident marks. You don't want to get too bogged down in trying to detail one part or another. I'm going to come in here. I guess I've got that on a new layer, so that's fine. And I'll start chopping in some of this like framing. And I recall this article I read a long time ago. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I want to say it was like Steven Stallberg or something like that. He was talking about this 1-2-3 read, where you go for the big forms, the big shapes in your scene, and that's your one, right? Like this water behind it, this big orange mass for the boat in the sky. That's level 1. And then level 2 is like these cutouts, the dark areas, the shadow areas there. And then your level 3 is these details that are, this fine detail in here. And of course, that can be, you can use that just as a simple reminder. And I often find that I do need these really simple reminders of like, hey, make sure there's a 1-2-3 read, right? Like, is there big form, medium-sized form, and then little details? And you just kind of ask yourself that as an analytical tool. And then you can also ask that in terms of composition, right? So is there like a main focal point, number 1? And then is there a number 2 that's not quite as, central or eye-catching? It's composed in such a way that it's not as important as your primary. And then, your 3. Something else in the scene that kind of relates to the other things. And so since this is a photograph of a shipwreck, that's not really, I'm not going to say that it's not relevant. It is relevant. But it's, there isn't always a story being told in a photo. The story of this is, what was this ship? Was it fishing ship or oil, an oil operation? Seems to be tropics, Pacific maybe. So you start to get a little bit of story there, but as a painter, you really should be thinking a little bit more than that. I mean, you can. I suppose that's subjective. Like, I don't know that I can emphatically say you need to do more than that, but you certainly can. You can start putting things into the scene, composing it in such a way that there's more of a relationship between parts. So, if, for example, we added like some life in there, like a seagull, or turtles, something that has taken up residence in this thing, then you're telling a little bit more of a story, a little bit more of how items, objects in the scene relate. Let's see. All right, one moment here. I'm gonna block something in real quick, and then I need to check the stream again because my device that I'm using as a monitor just decided to give up. And I'm too insecure not to know whether or not things are working. If there's something in the chat that I should be answering. So, anyway, I'll get this block in here. And let's see. Okay. Yeah, now check this out. Let's see. Sorry, I bumped the microphone there. iPad doesn't want to read my thumb. Okay. Cool. Yeah, alright, so we're back. Let me catch up. Get it live here on my monitor. Alright, awesome. Okay. Now, I'm debating whether I want to hit this again with another brush. You know, that would add a little more grit and texture. I suppose we may as well. So let me just get a little bit more. I just figured out in here. I want to have a shadow area here. So the ship is casting a shadow onto the rocks here. Let's get that bright green there that I want to kind of knock out. And then we can get that brush idea. All right, so I'll do another layer. Grab my brushes, and I have a whole bunch of brushes here. The one that I've been using, I call that the Nasty Square Standard. This is one that I use a lot. I really like square brushes, but this one has a whole bunch of texture and some kind of loose, like loose bristles around it. And so I use that one a lot for block in. And then there are a couple of others that are nice for, you know, getting grit and texture in. We can try this, the Cut Cross 6. This is a pretty good one for getting texture in. Let's see, just give it a light brush and I'm kind of just keep it on a like on a certain direction. Again, with the trying to get the light to pass across the form and the wear to pass across the form in a not necessarily a uniform manner, but in a way that transitions from one area of the form to the next. So if this is getting a whole bunch of rain, you know, or salt water gets splashed up on it, and then that runs down. You know, we kind of explained that earlier. So you're using that wear to communicate form. And then same idea here. You know, if you know this area is getting all beat up here, you might want it to pass on to that as well, and maybe up onto, you know, this thing here. And then I'm going to pin this to the layer down here like that. Actually, this could, let's see, unpin that. Unpin that. So what I'm doing is I'm holding Alt and I'm clicking between the layers, and then it will confine this layer to the layer below it. So I'm just going to merge these together, merge that together, and then this is my wear layer. So I'll call this one, that's the ship. This one is wear. All right. And a neat little time-saving trick with this And if I'm, kind of brushing this area, kind of putting wear on these windows, on those frames there. But I don't want it to travel into this, that dark area. Well, there's a couple ways you can do it, but here we'll double click the layer, and then we'll do blend if right here, and we'll go underlying layer, and then we'll bump up the light value there. So basically, if it's in this dark region here, it's not going to blend. So that way we can kind of paint through some of this stuff, and we're not painting into that dark region. And like I said, there's a couple ways to do that. Like I was saying earlier, pinning the layers together. Certainly blend. There's some blend modes that in the right circumstances would act that way. I'm gonna darken up my wear here and switch the color to blue so that we have kind of a complement going on here, and that's gonna make these colors kind of pop against each other, and make it more visually interesting. If I zoom in, I can show you what's going on there. See, so you've got this kind of desaturated blue right next to this kind of medium saturated orange red there, and so they're almost directly across on the color wheel as complements, and that desaturated blue is going to make this red even more powerful. And I can turn that off, and you can see, you're looking at this red ship, and then you turn that on, and it kind of just makes your eyes dance a little bit between those two colors, and you want to do it in a way that's pretty subtle. You can do it however you'd like, but I would say generally try to be subtle with that, because it's going to draw the eye in. And so you want to make it visually interesting without making it, without, getting too heavy-handed and making it very difficult to read what's going on in the scene. So yeah, I was just glancing down at the text there. I see you picked up the brushes on ArtStation. That's awesome. Yeah, let me know if you have a favorite brush. I find that as I'm painting, I typically will only use a few brushes at a time. So like for this painting, you can see so far I've only used 3. So I used the Nasty Square as a block in, and then the Cut Cross for the grunge, and then I used for the eraser, I'm using the texture comb. And actually, this might be it might have a different name because this is from my full set here, and then I put 32 of the best ones together, so it would probably be this one, the chain rake, as the eraser for the 32 Painterly brushes. And so yeah, so I've been using those 3 brushes. I like to use that eraser as a or I like to use the chain rake as an eraser. It's like a comb, basically, if you think about it that way. Like if you're working in oil, and then you can comb through it, comb it out, then you get this kind of you get a lot of texture and what's the term? Uniformity, right? So they're evenly spaced, but you get all this texture in it. And if I zoom in, you can see what's going on there. So we did all that painting with the one brush, and then we erased through it, and it just gives you a lot of free noise. Okay, so I think there's a little more we could do with this, and I might be tempted to do it, but like I said, when I started the stream, my intent was to kind of get some broad strokes, big ideas for a kind of bombed out, rundown scene, and I'm not necessarily, going to be too hung up on the, individual references. So this one I might, I think I'll come back to this one and play with this one a little bit more. This I've already started to deviate from the reference, and I think it would be fun to maybe give this one a little bit more life. So let's see. I'll hit it with that eraser again because that's what I was talking about, and in doing so, you see how much kind of added implied detail we're getting there. So I'm trying to show these, there's a couple different structures here, and then of course they're like bombed out, or at least over time they've been reduced to rubble. So I think I need to clean that up a little bit to make it clearer at least. What these forms are, which way they're pointing. So some of these are stone, and then others are some trees in the background there. So I don't typically work in grayscale. It is a good practice to to get your scenes worked out in black and white and gray. But at some point I just started jumping right into color in my process, and I don't know. It seemed to me that I would get too bogged down in following like a blueprint that I laid out for myself, and it didn't allow me to be as free. Even like open-minded is not quite the right word, but like you kind of you're okay with letting things go. If you're just painting directly. And there's a catch-22 there. I mean, if you get too hung up in your colors and all the work that you've, like, you put all this work in to use this, particular color or whatever, then you feel like you're married to it. And it does give you kind of an emotional response to your painting, like the colors that you use kind of define the mood and the feeling, and that can actually start to affect your mood as you're painting, right? And so that can be a positive thing. It can also be an awful thing if you're not quite nailing it, or if there's something about that color scheme that you're playing with that maybe just doesn't quite line up, and so you're in one frame of mind, and really that might not be the frame of mind you need to be in. And so, like, an example of that might be, this in my mind, as you're entering the scene, kind of, this is after the fact, you know, it's actually kind of serene, even though it's destruction and so forth. But, you know, if you were to change that feeling and say that you wanted it to be tense, you know, a tense moment, then you would probably approach the palette very differently. And so that would tend to change the way that you are composing the scene. If you're thinking this is a tense moment versus a serene, you know, quiet moment or whatever. So yeah, so going back to grayscale versus color, I think it's fine to work in grayscale. I'm not saying that to knock it as a you know, a lesser or illegitimate way to work or anything like that. I think it's totally legitimate and makes sense. And for a lot of people, it's a comfortable way to work. For me, though, it just I would end up with very rigid kind of paintings where I was just getting too analytical, maybe thinking ahead too much on, you know, I don't know, too contrived, and I wasn't like being free to, you know, allow the what I'm seeing on screen to kind of give me feedback. You know what I mean? Like you're looking at it, and it's kind of guiding you in the mood of what's going on, and you're looking for like a virtuous cycle, if that makes sense. So a virtuous cycle being something that feeds itself, right? You're working on the painting, and it sounds so cliche to say, like, and it's working on you, but like, really, you know, you're responding to what you're seeing, and you're going, okay, yeah, that, you know, that light feels right, or you know, it feels like it should, you know, come up this this form here, you know. So it's maybe more responsive than it is, you know, planned and contrived, and that can be a good thing. It can lead you places that you didn't intend to go. Now, I'll say on the flip side of that, these are different skills that you're developing. So the skill to explore freely, and the skill to you know, plan out and execute. You know, if you do too much exploration, then you might not have the finishing skills. I mean, this was actually something that I struggled with for a while, and I would say, you know, it's still a challenge for me, that I just want to stay in this kind of concept realm. You know, just everything is subject to change, and you know, I just want it to be interesting enough to kind of pique my curiosity, my imagination. But when it comes to like, okay, now just detail everything, get those, you know, all these windows and forms to be communicating, you know, what the modeler has to make. You know, that's valuable in a team, but it's just not as fun. You know, it's not as interesting. So, yeah. So we were talking about the brushes. There's kind of the base set that I put out was the 32 painterly brushes, and these are all intended to show like the gesture, the mark of what you're working on here. And there's a video that I put out that talks about that. And they're like general purpose, I'd say. They're kind of intended to be these like gestural, like you can see the artist's hand in the work. Now, if you wanted something more specific, like you'd call it more like a task-oriented brush. I do have some of those that I've been playing with. I mean, some that I've built and used for different projects. So, like an example of that would be, let's see where the pattern brush is here. So here's like a ridiculous example of it. I made this eyeball brush. Do a new layer here, and it just looks different directions, and it stays constrained to you'll always have the iris within the eyeball there. And there's like another one here that's a fur. So if I do a new layer like behind this one's like a silhouette brush. So really quickly block in these creatures or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, there's all different kinds of ways to create and use brushes. I think you want to approach it as like a, or at least I look at it as a tool, like a custom tool that you're building. Like if you're in your garage and you're working on a project, and it would make sense to have like a jig, that makes your life a whole lot easier, then build it. I don't know. There's something I kind of like geek out on that kind of stuff, and I find it fun. And so anyway, a lot of those brushes I have made for either particular projects or, as I was painting, I just felt like, it could be so much better, and even marginal changes just to improve the feel of the brush. And so a lot of those have developed over time. And yeah, I don't want to sound too conceited or whatever, but like I'm proud of them. I'm happy with the way that they work, and they feel right to me. And that might partially be the fact that I am so comfortable with them, and I built them around the way that I think, the way that I approach painting. I mean, I'm sure that is a factor. But yeah, anyway, if you're interested in those, check them out. There's another set that I put out that are the foliage brushes, and those are more specific. There's also a video on that as well, and there's one more that I'm putting together that has a kind of really interesting. It's like a cross between the two, and I'll show you that one here in just a second. Let's see the two mentalities. So of having a more gestural brush, and then having like a specific task. With these foliage brushes, they're pretty structured in the way that they're supposed to be used. And then I did this this pack here. It's not out yet, but anyway, these are kind of meant to be like a one-stop. Well, I don't know if one-stop's the right term, but I was trying to get something that would let me get these kind of interesting brush strokes, where I had a lot of control over over how it hit the canvas. You know, it wasn't just like a not just a like a texture in the background, and you're just kind of beholden to whatever that pattern is. But like you're actually making decisions about, you know, how I twist the brush or the pressure that I add. And so this one, you know, with one brush, you can do these really nice, you know, kind of curves that kind of open up into like a thicker brush with a little bit of a rough edge there. And then if you you like twist, like push and twirl the brush at the same time, the stylus, then you get these more like foliage type, like leaf type things here. So anyway, this one is a good one for foliage, but I didn't put it in that pack because it kind of has a wider purpose to it. It's nice for, you know, just drawing in general. Like it's just I don't know, has a nice feel to it. So anyway, I'll spare you on the pitch for things coming down the line, but that is um, one set that I've been playing with. I wanted to flesh it out more with brushes that are kind of similar in and how they kind of fall between categories. Like they're not quite like a specific specialty task brush, but then they also so they lend themselves to being used just in a general purpose, but then really do fit nicely into a certain category of whether it's foliage or you know, kind of an inked kind of feel or something like that. All right, so I'm going to hit this with overlay again, like I do generally. That one more of a rust color there. All right, that's good enough for me for now. This one was kind of getting away from me a little bit. This other one might, yeah, let's see. That's the overlay there. So smudge some of that back in so that painting's not getting too far off there. And I'll jump in with this, and I will tighten up a little bit of this. I think we owe it to the viewer to understand what some of these things are, or at least have it implied well enough. And I think in this case, I'm going to try just doing. I'm going to do the smudge brush and do sample all layers with these selections made, and I'm just going to drag things over. That way you kind of get a tight edge from whatever's like around it, and you delineate, you know, like between this yellow and this like blue up here. Start kind of cleaning that up without, you know, necessarily going in and painting in a solid color. Oops. Actually, I think here I really will take something dark, brush it in there. Whoops, a little too much. I think we need this kind of more of that negative space in there. Getting this weird, like, cranky Frankenstein face that I can't unsee in there. That drives me nuts when you're painting and then you like paint something in that, like, you can't, like you see an eye or a nose. I always see it in structures, houses, like the, the door is like the mouth or something, and windows are eyeballs. And once you see it, like, no going back. And you have to, like, you're gonna have to paint it out for your own sanity. I wonder if that's a thing in architecture. Anybody know that? Like, if you're on the lookout for the face in the in the building, you know. That's funny. I was just reading the chat there. Yeah, so the brushes, you can get them on ArtStation. Uh, I can send you a link on the, well, if you watch any of the older live streams, I put the link in there, and I really should put the link in this current live stream. But yeah, there's 2 packs that I have out there. One's for foliage and one's for just general purpose use. You can get those on ArtStation. I also have a Gumroad or Flip Normals account. Whatever works best for you. And Eric, yeah, all those a huge collection of custom tools. Yeah, for sure. At some point, you look at it and you go, man, am I a pack rat? Do I have a problem? I mean, I think that like that eyeball brush, it's like that's kind of the epitome of that, right? It's like, how often am I going to use a brush that's a randomized eyeball? That's like a cartoon, like, I make these stupid little monsters with them, uh, and I love doing that. But like, I don't really know what else they'd be used for, you know. That's the whole gig right there. I gotta be careful here not to get, I'm trying to get this, like this little light catching the edge of a form there, but, too much of that and it just kills it. You kind of have to have one area that, there's an artist that called it the silver bullet. There's one area on your canvas that has the most attention. And if you start to draw that same kind of attention everywhere else, then it all kind of becomes equal. It's like that. What's that? That line from The Incredibles. He's like, when everybody's super, then no one will be. That kind of thing, right? So, when the whole painting is like crazy detailed and bright and colorful, then it's as if none of it is. You know, you kind of have to have areas of rest and you know, contrast, and a little bit of both. So that being said, I could do that right now, right? Start muting some of these out a little bit. I did like, you know, when I was talking about how you respond to a painting as you're going. As I started doing this, I liked how that little orange bit right up there, you know, popped against everything else. And then when I added it down here, kind of wanted to reference the two, but I actually think that it's competing, and it needs to chill out and let that be cool up there, you know. And by cool, I mean interesting, you know, the high school sense of the word cool, not the actual artistic term. And one of the things that I have been thinking about, and not that great at, I tend to flatten images out by making things in the background too large or tall. It's a very simple thing, but just coming back in and like flattening these things out a little bit. I'm just making them a little more horizontal. Seems to give the scene a little more depth, and I mean that just for things in the background, not for um, you know. I'm not saying that universally. You know, if you maybe just had a little bit of light coming in here, you know, and try to get that a little more, just this little horizontal sliver there. I don't know. I did like that little lump there. It's hard when you like something in your painting and you don't want to let it go. Fighting the urge, just saying. Okay. Good, good, good. Good enough. Or is it? I say that and then I immediately think, okay, well, I could probably do this. Probably add a little bit right here. Get that to feel like you keep going into this space here. Jump back to the nasty square brush. And then maybe we'll take some of this background color here. Give one of these and just show it. Just kind of peeking through here. You can kind of see like, okay, I could like maybe climb through all that junk. Get to something back there. I think it needs to be balanced out, color-wise. value-wise, rather. Um, Take this guy, and we'll just go. There's little softies right there. Okay. Good enough on that idea. Alright, let's see. Let's see if I can pull up another reference and do another combo kind of thing. So here's one of the ideas that I've been playing with. In terms of storytelling with these fantastic type paintings, is that I keep finding kind of the need to ground it, you know, like to not go too grandiose, too big with the ideas. Like I wanted my work to have a larger scale to it. And that was, you know, partly like a technical thing. Like I was doing a lot of work that was like one specific object, you know, like you know, let's paint some swords or some armor, or you know, a portrait for this character, and they're like object based. It's like you're painting one thing and you're not painting a whole scene, right? And so as I started branching out into scenes and balancing things together, I felt that like that natural tendency to keep things like small and isolated. You know, like the whole painting is about this one object, right? And there is some wisdom in, you know, keeping it about one particular thing and not, you know, trying to do everything in one painting. But I found that I wasn't really that great at balancing different elements. Like I wanted to render one thing, you know, to be like the star, like this awesome thing, and then really what's important is that the whole scene reads together. And you know, it's been said a million times, and so it's not like I'm really saying anything new, but you know, some things fall into the background, some things, you know, get blurred out, some things aren't rendered as clearly, et cetera, in service of the big idea, the big scene. But as I kind of developed that work and am still developing that work, I would struggle with just the scenes feeling like small and flat. You know, like they just the scale of it. You know, like I wanted a building to feel huge, or like this character to be like this, you know, tiny little, you know, part of a bigger scene. And then what it would end up with is like everything would almost be like equal size on the canvas, and you know, the character would be bigger than they needed to be because maybe subconsciously I wanted them to have more real estate so that they could be, you know, I could render them more and show more detail and that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, so you know, that was like a learned thing um, to really think, okay, yeah, this object, this character really needs to be insignificant, in relation to the whole scene. If that's the thing, if you're going for this epic scale. Now, bringing that all back to what I was saying at the start of this, is that epic scale, though, can also make something totally unrelatable. Like it's not, you'll see this, I think, in Hollywood. Every sci-fi, every fantasy movie, that's what they're going for, and that's it's inherent in it. Like, it makes sense why that is. Like, there's this big epic tale. It's like, well, we probably wouldn't be telling the tale if it weren't epic, right? It's just like, yeah, they went out and they made some bread, and it was really good bread, Like, yeah, okay, no. The hobbits have to go on a journey, and there's got to be some, something crazy going on, and it's huge, right? It's huge, epic proportions. The problem with that is that if you're always painting that way, you're trying to get something to feel just massive. It becomes more fantastic, and you lose that suspension of disbelief. And sorry if you've heard the term before, and I'm just going to explain it, and drive you nuts. You've already heard it, but the idea of the suspension of disbelief is like, you're doing something that's fantastic. You're doing something that's not real. These paintings aren't real. I mean, even just in the technical sense, this is a two-dimensional arrangement of color and value, light and dark, and it's an illusion. It's an illusion of space, and then illusion that space actually represents something with a meaning. This being a burnout building with just the chimney and the stone structure remains, and then the rest of it started, being overgrown. That's all an illusion. Now, the suspension of disbelief is giving you enough to make it feel like it could be real, and yet you can bend it enough to share all those fantastic elements that aren't present in reality. And so, anyway, all that being said, I've been thinking about this in storytelling, like really kind of bringing the scale down to a human scale, that it feels like you could travel, like you could be the one kind of stumbling across this, rather than you're seeing it from this crazy perspective, and it's so huge, and it looks like it was built by giants, and it should kind of feel like this could really happen. Like you could really find this, and it would have been, maybe built in a certain time period, and you could imagine the events that led up to its destruction. Anyway, I'm monologuing, using a lot of words to say not a whole lot. But all that to say that that has become something to me that is important in the way that I depict things, that should feel like it's human, it's relatable. It's not always this crazy, fantastic, impossible thing. And I have a affinity for that as well. There are some things that just cool to pretend, cool to imagine, but if you can't ground them in reality, then they're just hard to really latch onto and enjoy in any a long-term sense, I guess. Okay, I'll spare your minds and ears any more of that. Yeah, some of this here that I'm doing, I think, is getting too heavy. I'm going to try to vary how it's applied. Should come back to that idea, the 1, 2, 3 read, right? Like, maybe simplify all of this together into one block of foliage here, rather than all these kind of uniform. I would like put them in the 2 category there, like that's a kind of a secondary shape, silhouette in the composition. And I suppose I could paint sky behind that. And I had already painted a little bit of color back there that was very similar to this background color, so that's competing a little bit. That is fine though. And I think probably the easiest thing to do would be to do an overlay, get some light into the scene. There's some like, actually kind of almost lime. No, that's too green there. See if we can get this color figured out here. More the warm. There we go. That's closer to what I'm seeing in the reference. I think what I could probably do with this is get more of a scatter brush, maybe. Let me see. I'm back up here. And you can see, I was working on a lot of that zoomed out. I've mentioned that before. I do that just to try to get the big picture, so I'm not getting bogged down in like too much of the specifics. Getting one area to read perfectly, but working the image as a whole. I'm just coming back in with the eraser, cutting these out. So I laid in an overlay layer to try to bump up some of the value. It would increase the saturation, so it's going to look like a richer. The greens will turn more towards yellow. The reds will turn a little more towards orange. And so now I'm just hitting it with this comb eraser to give it more texture in the way that it is applied. come back to this one, hit my smudge brush, and get some of that cleaned up there just a little bit. Now I'm tempted to try something here, and now that I've opened my mouth, I kind of have to, right? So, one of the ways to get a lot of free texture and information in a painting is if you, you get your block in, kind of like what I've got here, and then you do like an overlay or something like that, or you do some other kind of adjustment layer, and then you come back and do sample all layers when you're smudging. And so that's going to take all that information combined and then condense it to wherever your brush stroke is when you're going on that layer. So then any of those effects that are in play they're still going on, right? So then they're going to basically repeat in that area. And so why don't I just do it? It's probably easier to see it happen than to try to listen to try to follow along with my explanation of what I believe will happen. All right, so I'm going to do a new layer. Now I've only have the overlay going on. So I think we actually need to get a little deeper than that. Maybe like a maybe if we add a color balance or something like that. I'll do 2 layers. So I'm going to do, this will be our smudge layer. That's the one we're going to test, play with. So this will be overlay. It's basically going to be a vignette there. This one will also be overlay. And this one's light. So that's light, and then this one is more or less a vignette. More or less. It's going to be, what I have in mind is just, the focal point here. We'll bump that up. And then as we come, to the edges, we're going to darken it down. And I might even use this reddish color for that instead. There we go, like a muted. There we go. So that's just a real quick and dirty, instead of this flat look here, we're trying to pull your attention in towards the middle. And I suppose I could go just a little bit more with that. Go, where were we? Over here. And just go through those windows there. That might be too heavy, but whatever, we'll go with it. Okay, so now let's do that color balance, and we'll just select this region so that we're not messing with all the other paintings in the on the canvas right now. And what did I say? Color balance. There we go. And we'll just start playing with this. Don't have to get too crazy, but we want a little variation so that when we smudge underneath there, it's going to that variation is going to show through. Okay, and then highlights. So again, with the idea of like the palette really changing the way that you interact with a piece as you're developing it, the right palette, and this is looking like it's in the tropics, and then another shift in palette, and you feel like you're in, you know, Northern Europe or something. Like, does that feel like overcast, or does it feel like a really warm, warm sky back there? All depends on how you shift that color palette. Okay, so I think that there is probably subtle enough. I might be doing quite a bit, but so now we've got a couple different effects going on, and maybe too much, but let's see how it works for us. So if I go to my smudge tool, and I'm going to hit sample all layers. So basically it's going to take everything that's stacked together and make, wherever I smudge, it's just going to make that a color as a mix of everything that I'm seeing, rather than selecting whichever layer I'm on and moving that. And so you can just take something. So all I'm really doing is moving things around, but then all these other layers are compounding on top of it, right? Now the overlay is having quite an effect there, so that might be one that we would nerf when we do this. Like I said, it might be too much going on all at once, but anyway, we'll keep it going. See where this goes. Oh, that's interesting. So this would be an example of one of those times where you just explore a little bit. I might have said this in like previous sessions, but I have like different modes of thinking when I work. Sometimes you want to just hit familiar territory and work with processes that you know, subject matter that you know, software that you know, that sort of thing. And then sometimes you just have to like have something shake you up and teach you to approach it differently, teach you to think about things differently. And if you're trying to do that on your own, like we're doing here, we're just trying to we know that this is going to give us a funky result, but we're just going to play with it and see if we can start to harness this. Then you don't know. Obviously, you don't always get the desired result, but that is fine. All right. So, if at any point you're doing this, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, I kind of want to push this until it breaks, and then see if we can rein it back in. So if we turn off sample all layers, and then we come back in, and we can start chopping these up and blending them into our scene, because we're not grabbing all that information, we're just grabbing the information that we just added, right? If that makes sense. And if you haven't seen the video on these brushes, again, I'm not trying to harp on these brushes and try to get you to buy them or whatever, though that would be fine if you wanted to buy them. the reason I'm bringing it up is that there really is a functionality to this particular brush that changes the way that you approach it and think about it. So this is a smudge brush, but it's really just a square that repeats and jumps around. And so the way that this one works, it doesn't have like a regular interval. It actually it repeats at the same speed. So the faster you take the stroke, the more broken up it is. So if I take a slow stroke, I'll just give an example. If I take a slow stroke, I can drag that and it's smudgy, right? If I take a fast stroke, you see how it's chopped up, and that's because it's the same. It's making those samples at the same speed, but I'm taking a faster stroke, so they're farther apart when those stamps are made. Right? And the reason that would be interesting, I think, as a just on the technical side of painting, is that you want to have edge control, right? So some edges are soft, some edges are sharp, hard edges. And this is like a one-stop brush for being able to vary between hard and soft edges and have a lot of control over it. Okay, these yellows I hate. I think they're awful. But let's see if we can kind of work them in there, and maybe we'll use that comb eraser and just end up with a little bit of texture from these, and a little bit of something for light to bounce off of. By light to bounce off of, I don't even know why that phrase came out of my mouth. I was just total brain fart there. I mean something for complementary colors, to kind of dance between colors here. I know, man, that's such an abstract way to word it. How to word this? Basically, it adds visual interest to have these little pops of light and color that kind of pop through there. And we can come back and fine-tune those tones, which we probably will. Alright, so I'm going to grab this, smudge these in, get that to become more of a smooth transition there. I kind of like that transition from that warm tone there into that really dark black shadow there. Again, with these yellows, don't much care for them, but I think we can come back and turn them into something useful. And what I'm doing here is I've got a color, this foreground color, this blue. If you hold Alt while you've got your smudge brush selected, it will dab a little bit of that paint before you before it does the smudge. So you actually lay some color down, and then you can blend it in. And so that's a handy little tool. And so I've that actually is this finger painting option. If you turn that on, then it's just going to do that all the time. But the hotkey is Alt, so you you can set it to default smudge, and then be able to jump to that whenever you want with that modifier. And so what I typically do, or rather what I have been doing for a long time, is I'll set up my Wacom brushes, or my Wacom drivers, so that button on my the rocker button on my Wacom is the Alt key. And so I'll just paint this way, tapping that modifier as I'm going. Okay, so we've done all that just to see what it would do. So we drop it out and bring it back in. See, got all that kind of experimental visual interest with not a whole lot of effort. Now let's see, we could disable these blend modes to see what we end up with. Excuse me. So I definitely think that's helping. I think I like that. Not entirely sure. And for the most part, I like that, but I don't. It's the yellow, I think, that's driving me nuts. And it does get really muddy between all of those. We can also move this up and down the layer stack. That makes it much tamer. I don't know. I kind of like how wild it is down there. It's just super bright colors and stuff. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and we'll do an adjustment layer to see if we can clean up a little bit of this. So hue saturation is a decent one to identify different portions and clean them up. And so if I wanted to take these yellows, I could selectively go into my yellow range and I can pick what I want here. And sometimes I'll just bump it all the way up so that I can see what it is that I'm dealing with. Okay. So see how I'm starting to grab some of these greens, and I don't want that, so I'm going to slide this over until we can see that we're only really dealing with the yellow values. I might be concerned with some of the reds and what that's doing. So if I got that dialed in to what I want, then I can shift this over, shift those tones, and then of course we'll bring the saturation down once we're happy with where it ends up. And just so you can see here, it's not going to line up with the color here because we're shifting it. We're not selecting which color we want. We're starting at our baseline and shifting it over. So actually right here is going to show us what we end up with. Right, so if we shift that over, it's going to say anything in that range is going to end up looking like this. That's where you get your information there. So I actually really like going with like either these greens or these teal. I'm going to try a few other things real quick. This looks crazy, but this could work once we lower the saturation. So yeah, let's go with that, and then we'll lower the saturation and see where that lands us. About there. We'll start playing with this here. So we tried that purple. Yeah, don't like that as much. The blue, it gives a nice, it gives a nice tone for all this other stuff to kind of compete with a little bit. But it's not so overpowering. Whereas, so this green, it's going to be a little bit powerful, and then we could maybe dial it back. And the concern would be that this would get lost in the other stuff, the other green tones there. Test those two right there. So this blue. What we can do, we can just set it how we want, or set it to one of these, and then either change it and jump back and forth with history states, or do what I'm doing here, where I've multiplied the layer, or I've duplicated the layer, and then I'm going to make that change. I'll make the change here. And yeah, typically how I'll approach this is I'll find the hue that I like. Like this green. Maybe that's not quite it, but let's say that's what I want. And then your saturation and lightness is really just to get it, in my opinion, to get it blended into the rest of your composition. It can make a world of difference to have this like just super saturated color here, but for that to be dark and saturated versus bright and saturated, make a world of difference, right? And so as you're making these adjustments, just realize that just because you're in one like hue range, you actually have a lot of options to get that to blend into your scene. And you could really get almost any color, I think, to blend if you play with your value and saturation. Okay. So then we can jump between these two. So we got that one, right? And turn that off. Turn the other one on. That's our original. That's our blue. That's our like teal. We go back to our blue. Make some adjustments to it with the saturation and value. So again, we were targeting the yellow range. Excuse me. Right, brighten that up. Actually, I just go with that. So that's much tamer. That's more vibrant. And we should copy these masks here so that we're not completely messing with the other images. Okay, so I think what I'll do, excuse me, I'm going to erase out some of this stuff, and again, with that kind of jump between colors, that's the idea here. We're adding this texture and perceived detail. By jumping one color to the next, right? Having these two colors right next to each other is what I mean. And then I may even jump in and actually, well, I'm going to give this a go just to see how it benefits us. But I think we can jump in and increase the contrast on our mask so that these aren't really blending. There shouldn't be too much of a soft transition. There should be, or rather, for what I am aiming to do in this painting, I want these to jump from one value to another and not be, a soft, uncommitted transition. So we'll go to, so we've got the mask selected. We'll go to, adjustments, levels. You can bring these in so that this is your black, this is your white. And then you can shift one way or the other as you need to. You might need to zoom in a little bit to see what's going on here. And basically it's just which side of the mask is this going to favor? Is it going to favor the visible side or the part that's being knocked back, right? You can see here, this would be an example of it. Jumping from this yellow to that, soft blue. Yeah, now it doesn't want to actually catch up. We'll do that again so you can see. I think I hit an option there that. Yeah, so let's do that again. So we'll go layer, or rather image, adjustment, levels, bring this black in, bring this white in, and if you're looking between those two values there, pump it all the way that way. Yeah, you should be able to see how it's more yellow on this side, more blue on that side. And what I'm looking to do here is just get these really tight transitions. Okay, now if I were to take this, I can leave this one on so that it's going to still grab all those yellows that remain and make them teal, right? Or I could copy this over, which I think is what I'm going to do. End up copying that over, hide that layer, and then we'll see how it works with the yellow and teal, jumping back and forth, and see if that is more interesting than the other one. Yeah, I think they each have a little bit to offer. Not sure which one I like more. Then I might just have a transition one to the other. So I'll just take this one. Let's see how this will work. Put this one up top. This one's on the bottom. And then I'm just going to do just a gradient mask on the existing mask. We're going to knock out some of these areas so that the other method kicks in. All right. Mask this off. Go back to my hue saturation. So I could do like a color balance. Actually, that's probably a good idea. We'll do color balance just to see if we can deal with it on a whole rather than too isolated and too controlling. Now, I do want to come back in after this with where I was headed with it. That was a hue saturation layer, and what we'll do with that is we'll select individual colors in the painting, and we'll push and pull them. Either increase their saturation, shift them a little bit in hue, value, that sort of thing. So in a full disclosure, that's like it's basically allowing the palette to be later in the decision making, where if I were doing this traditionally, palette would come into play much earlier on. Well, I think for obvious reasons. You wouldn't want to start painting in oil and then decide that you want to do different colors for everything. It happens sometimes, but sure would be better if you knew what you were doing going into it. Whereas with digital, it really doesn't matter. You can get away with really, really working out color last. That's fine, in my opinion. Okay, so now here's that hue saturation layer that I was talking about. Let's say we take these reds and we just totally pump them up. And we want to keep that in the red zone so that we're not dealing with this other, this chimney here. See what we've got. Okay, so we'll bump those up, not too high though, so that we have some room to move with them. And now you can see I'm going up and down with value. And there's a relationship between value and saturation. If you look over here on this triangle. This is a Coolerus. Coolerus is a plugin you can get for Photoshop. It's just the color picker, but it's a little more. I find it more intuitive. But anyway, so if you're looking at this triangle and you're moving from desaturated black to white up the scale, and then from desaturated to saturated, all the way to the right over here. It's in your center value that you're going to have your highest saturation. And you can see that it shifts. The value shifts as you shift color. So in this, purple, and then into these blue, indigo, whatever color you want to call that down there. That's darker than when you're in teal, right? Like that fully saturated natural hue has a natural value, right? So consider that when you're dealing with your color corrections here. That like if you really want to saturate this, but it's not saturating, it might be because it's too dark or it's too light. So if I get too bright, those are going to be pink, right? And if they're too dark, then they're not going to have that same vibrancy. So be thinking about if that's what you want. If you really want those to be punchy, then gonna move closer to the midtones, which in this case is what I want. I mean, I do like a nice, like a dark, right about there, I think is what I like for that red. So yeah, then we're just gonna go zone by zone. We're gonna pick our greens, pump that all the way up so that we know what we're working with. And then we're going to dial it in. Make sure we've got the area that we want. Okay. Again, up and down on the scale. I might reserve more of this for my yellow range, so I'll just kind of come over here. Like so. We'll go to yellow. Again, dial this in to make sure you're actually working with the part that you want to be working with. And, we may also make decisions on, okay, well, if we don't like this in the palette, then we can shift it in one direction or another. Again, with the natural value of certain hues, if you're trying to get a natural look, then you might have to shift that hue a little bit to match the value that you're going for. Okay, and now we'll go blues, I suppose. Goes all the way up. Let's dial these in so I make sure we're working with what we intend to be working with. Now, when you're doing this, some of this is going to be desaturated enough that it's not actually going to grab what you want it to grab. So you might have to actually go in and paint some of these areas. Like, for example, this in-between area here. It's just too gray to begin with. It really isn't going to be too affected by what we're doing here. You see how much control that gives you? Like we can grab that blue and just say, yeah, we don't want it to be blue. We want it to be like a orange, yellow, golden sunset. I actually can't really decide. Like I like this. This super saturated, these colors give me more of a, not really a dreamlike thing, but it kind of makes it feel like this is a really, rich kind of magical place or whatever. Whereas, bumping it over here makes it feel like that's more that drama, like something's going on, like, some high priest is going to show up here or something, and some kind of weird ritual is going to go on or something. This is, to me, selling more of a story, whereas this is selling more of a sense of what the place would feel like, like, yeah. It's weird. It's a weird thing how color can do that. Excuse me. Let me grab a drink real quick. I can't decide. Do I like that? Or do I like that? I'm just going to go with the blue for now. A little more tame, neutral. Gonna wrap my head around that. All right, magentas. Let's see if we don't have too many of those in the scene. Try to get that dialed in. Might just shift those over to another color. There's only a very little bit of that in the scene anyway. I don't know how worth it is to me to mess with it. We'll keep it relatively the same so that we're not messing with something we can't really see. Excuse me. Did we get them all? I think we did. Then of course you have your master, and if you wanted to move everything all at once, it's a little crazy, but you can if you want to. So again, we can do that same way where we can erase out portions of that. If we really wanted to push that color, we could go with that. I mean, that would be. I'm happy with those kind of insane colors, but I might think about cleaning up some of these edges and stuff, delineating areas. But yeah, I certainly would approach that as a legitimate way to start to figure out your palette. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to erase this and then start painting in where I want some of those color pops to be. Right. So we did that whole shift in there, and then now we're painting a mask. So what I'm playing with here is kind of figuring out whether I want these, want that extreme color in the background, some of the foreground elements. So it can be, if it's used sparingly, this little pop of light here and there, pop of color here and there, then it's really nice as a foreground or a focal point type thing. And if you do it in a mass, you could get away with doing it as the background. Right, so like if we just like mask this whole background out as that teal, then instead of that, kind of jumping around as something that draws the eye, it just becomes one piece of information. But I'm debating whether or not I want that. I don't know. It's difficult. I do like that. I like it either way. One of those. I guess it's just an indecisive night. All right, go with that. And I think I will go ahead with just a paint over to simplify some of these. I suppose I could jump into that foliage pack, get some really quick and dirty. Dirty's not the right term. Quick and clean foliage in there. Already got quick and dirty. Zoom out a little bit here to decide what's working and what's not. Certainly some reference would help. You know, I'm trying to work out colors. Sometimes you're doing it just by feel, right? Like, does it give the emotional impact that I'm going for? And then times you just need reference to make it believable, make it work. I think that needs to be a little bit darker. it transitions into that kind of burnt out top. Top there is looking darker. And I don't know. Kind of like having that almost be a lost edge there. Yeah, I'm really trying to define that, like bring that back in. But it was kind of nice having it like fade off into nothing there. Do you like those little greens? I mean, that really rich green in there. Might need to define some of this a little bit better. How these forms transition into each other. And break up that edge a little bit. Yeah, now I might be getting a little too bogged down again. Trying to get some of these things worked out, you know, so that the form reads correctly. You know, that you're led around the scene a certain way as well. But you know, you get too bogged down in it, then you lose all that freshness of the, you know, those large gestural strokes. You know. Okay, I think I'm gonna try to bring this to a good closing point here. There's a lot that could be done on this painting, but actually I like the simplicity of it. You know, it's just bright, vibrant. You can tell that it's ruins. You can tell that there's overgrowth going on. I like all that. Yeah, I feel bad. You know, I had to go silent for a little bit here. Just kind of working through this painting in my head. And, you know, it reminds me, you used to play guitar a bit, and some friends of mine would tell me that I'd get this, like, glazed over look in my eyes, and I'm, like, trying to work something out on the guitar. And, like, yeah, okay, he's gone. You know, like, just going into this mental space of, you know, trying to work out whatever it was that I'm thinking, feeling, you know, wanting to use the medium to express, right? Okay. Maybe we hit some of these so that this light, you know, this background here comes through and behind this form doesn't get lost. You know, it doesn't jump. You know, so that you can see that this should transition from here to here. You know, these are related. Oh yeah, I was going to do a foliage brush thing. Let's do that. Give it a go. Let's see. We got, well, even in the painterly brushes, I have this foliage rough, which is great for just roughing in, you know, blocking in foliage. Uh, it's not too representational in terms of, like, you know, it's not trying to be a palm tree. It's not trying to be, um, you know, branches or anything like that, but it's just have this just kind of nice canopy-ish look to it. Um, okay, so that one. Let's jump to foliage, right? So I think probably this tree scraggly would work. And this one, the harder you press, the more um, kind of leaves, I guess you would say, you get out of it. It has like a trunk to it, and then the more you press, the more you get these kind of growth coming out. And then we could do the palm brush. And this one is really trying to be specific, a specific thing, you know. If we zoom in on that, let me change that color. Of course, I didn't actually paint any palm trunks going up there, so that's not the brightest move to have palm branches coming out of a completely different kind of trunk. Actually, I really liked the, this like super bright, vibrant red. So I kind of want to have these little bits there. And we might try to draw the eye in down here, by echoing some of those things. Showing that it, you kind of follow it from, almost like it's radiating out, like. Okay, and then if we grab some of this darker color here, and we've still got this palm, but not quite as intense. Yeah, I don't really like those ones. We'll mix those ones out. And then, what else do we have? We got this one's a nice little of a scatter, some branches. We can kind of, so for this one, you could show it as it's the area where you can see through this tree into the one behind it. Actually, I'm going to knock some of this out there so that's not as extreme. This is a nice one if you want to show something like a foliage section kind of fading off into another thing. So you see how it's got this mass here, but then I can just kind of break it off into these little blotches here and there. So it makes a kind of a hard silhouette, but or rather a more graphic approach to it, but allows it to kind of trail off. And then I'm going to erase some of these out a little bit here. Okay, what was I doing? Right. Okay, let's go to be a good one here. I mean, this leaf group, this works pretty well. Just to block in, these more bush, shrub type things down here. Try doing it on the other end, where it's more, the bright colors coming through. That might be just adding too much noise. That might have been something to do earlier on, you know, and then work over it. That's too much. Get that color dialed in there. There we go. Getting to the point now where my machine is really chugging. And it records these videos as I go. So I end up with these super large, very large files on my system. And as the cache for Photoshop builds up and the video cache builds up, the computer gets unhappy. Okay, some of these I'm going to knock out because they're not helping. I think this could get knocked back. Some of these I might just shift the color. So if I lock the layer and I switch to something I can blend. Send those farther back to the background. Okay. Hmm. Can't really decide what I like more there. You know, I do like this gray. Let's just do a new layer here. And then we'll do, try to blend these in. And then we'll do a blend if option on it. If we can make that work. Excuse me. All right, so then blend if, we'll grab the underlying, move it up. Okay. That's probably good. You know, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking you could use like these little bits of light. You know, like if we grab this color here, it might make sense to throw something. Let's see, maybe this one or something. That's the wrong brush there. Let's try this guy. Zoom out again and look at this and see. Yeah, something more like that. Now I lost the chat, so I'm gonna have to jump back into that. But I'm about ready to wrap this up. Check to see if there were any questions that I didn't see that I you know, should have answered. And so let me just get this to a stopping point here. Oops. Vivid light, hard light. And I might just bend that a little bit. Okay, let me zoom out so you can see all these, and then I'm gonna check the chat on the monitor device here before I close this up. Yeah, okay. Doesn't look like there's any questions to answer. So, yeah, thanks for joining tonight. You can see we did just a pretty broad range of these kind of ruined scenes, and I just kind of wanted to get a general sense um, for things that have broken down and worn over time, gotten overgrown. Nature overtook them. So yeah, fun little session. Thanks for joining, and yeah, I hope you got something out of it. And if you're painting along, I'd love to see what you're coming up with. You could send those on, if you post them on Instagram. You can find me on there, Eric Elwell Art. And yeah, just shoot it over to me in a DM or something, and it'd be cool to see what everyone else is coming up with as we're doing these. All right, thank you for joining tonight, and have a good night.